Constitutional Convention Part 3. We're looking at areas of general consensus among the delegates. And we were on the question of whether or not the states would continue to be able to print their own money. Okay, by far the more popular viewpoint among just people in the states was for what they called paper money, because that's what it would be. There would be states borrowing by printing paper IOUs supposedly worth so much in silver coinage and spending them. They'd circulate around and all of that. Now, the reason people favored that, the people who favored it, tended to be debtors. You're a debtor if you owe more than you are owed. And paper money can, at the discretion of the legislature, be made inflationary by simply printing more than you can cover. So you can usually get away with that because it's very unlikely that all of it will come in for redemption on the same day. A paper bill is redeemed when you turn it into the government and get a silver dollar for it or whatever it is. Now, inflation up to a point is the debtor's friend because it enables the debtor to repay the creditor with money that's less valuable than the money they originally borrowed. That's why money and interest rates and all of that are never off the front burner in our government today or then or anywhere in between. And this is why Rhode Island wasn't there. Rhode Island was by far the worst case scenario. The government of that state was controlled by debtors, and they had printed out just vast amounts of really worthless paper currency. And the whole idea was to cheat creditors by repaying them with worthless money. And they also passed a law to the effect that if a debtor in Rhode Island offered Rhode Island currency to a creditor and the creditor refused to accept it at face value, the debt would be considered canceled. So this produced a scene seldom seen on this infested planet. Debtors pursuing creditors, holding out baskets full of worthless money and threatening to pay them off without mercy. That's the way it was. So Rhode Island was so afraid that they'd change this up, they might lose their authority to keep printing their own money and cheat people like that. They stonewalled the thing. They refused to appoint a delegation to the convention, hence were not represented. When the convention made its work public and called upon the states to summon ratifying conventions to okay it, Rhode Island refused to do that, and pretending it didn't exist. And finally, when 12 other states were already in, they finally gave in and joined. So that's why Rhode Island isn't there. Now, the other side was sound money. This tended to be creditors and just people with some common sense. Sound, strong, reliable, sound money. This would be where only the national government could manage the money supply. And states would not be able to do that anymore. An advantage would be you have one uniform money system. Plus, it was assumed that the national government would not print paper money like that, but at the very least, they would have actual money made of silver, possibly even gold. And we did. We started setting up a mint to coin money fairly soon after the Constitution was ratified. So a silver dollar doesn't inflate like that. It doesn't lose its value, and having money made of precious metals was a very serious hedge against inflation, and it worked. If the convention delegates had split on this, even like 70% to 30%, that would have been it. They would have been cooked. They would not have been able to agree. But most of the delegates, if not all of them, favored the sound money viewpoint. So we're going to call that an area of consensus. It doesn't really come up that I know of. And the final document limited the power to coin and regulate the value of money, quote unquote, to the national government alone. So those were areas of consensus. So we've got seeing things from a national perspective, which they worked their way around to. We have agreement on the need to strengthen the central government. We have a fear of excessive democracy, and we have a preference for sound money over paper money. Back to the thing about democracy, these men are actually painfully aware of the unblinking gaze of history. What they were doing would be analyzed and dissected for centuries to come. How would anybody know whether it worked or not? The idea, this is very important, the idea was to set up a government which would guarantee both freedom and security. And those have to be balanced against each other. They were very aware of the frailty and the failures of human nature. So this is a weird little analogy or metaphor. Let's say you made a little toy boat and you're going to release it into a babbling brook, a stream, and the deal is to see how far down it'll go without something happening to it. The Constitution was these guys' little toy boat. How long could it hold up against human frailty, against the human desire to acquire power and more power and absolute power? We're in danger on that right now, real danger. Wish I could tell you more. So that would be how you could tell in the long run whether it worked or not. So they're very painfully aware of that. All right. Decisions made on the first day. They convened on May 25th, 1787. They had enough states there. Rhode Island wasn't there and wasn't going to be there. New Hampshire won't be there for a while. So that's, as far as I know, that's 11. That's what they're going to have to go with. They unanimously chose George Washington to preside over the convention. And he did a good job of that. Now, if you are the presiding officer, you don't get to speak. Those are the rules of parliamentary procedure, which still apply today. Now, that's if they're in formal session. There's another, I don't know if it's a first day decision, but they made very free use of a device in parliamentary procedure known as the Committee of the Whole House. Short version, the Committee of the Whole. So after a few days, they realized that the formal rules of procedure are very restrictive. It limits how long anyone can speak and all of that. All these motions and things have to be made, and if they make a decision, it's set in stone. You'd have to move heaven and earth to go back and undo something. So the convention would meet in the morning. The chair would call the House to order and would entertain a motion to resolve into the Committee of the Whole. That would pass unanimously, routinely. And what they've done is exchange formal rules for committee rules. Okay? Committee rules are much more freewheeling. There can be much more interchange, much more free debate. You don't have the limits on how long someone can speak, and if a committee makes a decision, they can change their mind 10 minutes later. So basically, they did almost all their work under that procedure. They'd go from the formal rules to, they would appoint themselves a committee of themselves. Every member would be a member of the Committee of the Whole House. And so the committee would agree on something, and then they'd resolve back into formal rules and decide whether to accept the recommendation they just made to themselves as a Committee of the Whole. One thing somebody got put in, it's cost them a lot of time, I'm afraid. It was an agreement that any issue, no matter how settled they thought it was, could be brought back up, despite all the parliamentary roadblocks on it. So there were things that some people, opinion minorities, that word has other meanings now, that they just couldn't let go of, and they keep dragging them back out. So it's kind of amazing they got it all done. One more thing. They agreed to keep this whole thing, what would now be called an executive session. I don't know if you've ever been to a school board, but there are certain things they have to discuss that cannot be discussed in public. So at some point, they will agree to go into executive session, and they all get up from their chairs, walk through a door, and close it, and ain't nobody in there but the members of the board. And usually it's personnel matters that can't be public. Well, that's what this was going to be. Okay? They agreed, and I believe I read somewhere they actually swore an oath not to reveal to anyone outside that convention what they were doing, what they were talking about, the substance of their proceedings. They would lock the door. They would post armed sentries at the door to keep casual gawkers from just walking in. And they would keep the windows closed. It is summertime. It does get hot in Philadelphia. The guys from New England haven't brought anything but wool suits, so as long as they can stand the heat. Now, the building's still there. I've been there a while back. And if you're standing outside by one of the windows, the bottom of the window is just, right there. So you kind of have to be careful about that. There was this big brouhaha. They got there one morning and somebody had taken notes the previous day and carelessly left several sheets of paper under their chairs. That's half a day brouhaha, but one of the cleaning lady had found that. So got to be careful. They had to put a hush man on Franklin because a lot of times they get through, they adjourn, and they'd adjourn to some local tavern and start lubricating themselves. And old Ben gets a drink or two under his belt. He's liable to say just about anything. So they had to station somebody there to zip him up if he began to stray too far afield. Okay, so with all that in place, we will proceed to their main conflicts and how each was resolved. There was one really big conflict that's filled the sky. I should tell you that the first few days, they really don't know quite what they're doing. It doesn't seem to be taking any particular direction. And then the governor of Virginia, Edmund Randolph, offered James Madison's little list of ideas, plus one of his own that they put on the top of the list, as the basis for discussion and debate. And just without really thinking about it or knowing what was on there, I guess, the convention routinely accepted that. And it's believed, and I believe this myself, it was at that point that they took the Articles of Confederation, wadded them up in a nice tight paper one, and scored a three-pointer into a paper basket, waste paper basket at the far corner of the room. If they're following their implicit instructions, they're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to revise the articles. But no, they're going to start all over. By the way, I forget stuff. Why keep it all secret? Okay, the same reason if you were to sit down to write the great American novel, you're probably not going to show it to anybody or you're through if you're smart. They don't want members of the public making up their minds based on rumors and half-truths and stuff leaking out. You want a finished product to show them. Plus, the members can debate with complete freedom. They can say what's on their mind without worrying about who that might upset out in the general public. Because without that, if they're with press briefings, things like that they did not do, there could be outside efforts to bring pressure on the convention from the outside. Okay, so we're good. Now, within a couple of days, the big conflict blows up. It had to do with Congress. All right. I should tell you that the biggest conflict was between large population states and small population states. The small states greatly outnumbered the large population states, and they're voting by states. It's not by delegates. There are only about 3 large population states. Virginia is the largest. I think Massachusetts figured into it, North Carolina. I'm not even sure New York did. And the rest are small population states. Well, Madison had proposed a 2-house Congress. And the thing he didn't think was right about the Articles Congress or the Continental Congress before that was the states being represented as if they're equal. Okay, Madison proposes a 2-house Congress, and in the lower house, the members will be elected by the voters, and the more people a state has, the more members or seats in that house it will get. Proportional representation. Then, and that gets done eventually, but the next part didn't. Madison proposes there would also be an upper house elected by the lower house instead of the voters or anybody else. And in the upper house, also, like in the lower house, the states with more people would have more votes in the upper house as well. Okay, small states aren't going there.